Large corporations such as Coca-Cola and cities such as Las Vegas are shifting their water consciousness. What can the rest of us learn from this shift? Well, here's Charles Fishman, author of The Big Thirst, and we welcome you back for day two of our conversation. Nice to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just, on the chance that there are a couple of people out there who didn't see our first program, let's do a quick recap here. You're talking about the notion of our needing to change our water consciousness, which means what?
We've had 100 years in the developed world of water that is unlimited, safe, and free. We never think about the quality, the quantity, or the price when we turn on the tap. And that's been great. I call it the golden age of water. And I think we are headed into an era where there's going to be water scarcity in all kinds of places, even in places that are accustomed to never having to worry about their water, never thinking about water, are encountering water scarcity. And so I think we need a new ethic, a new approach, and that involves, at the very least, thinking about our water and measuring it and pricing it and using it more smartly. We need to go from the golden age of water to the era of smart water.
Smart water, okay. In which case, let's focus corporately first, and then we'll talk municipally after that. Coca-Cola, obviously they sell, basically, water. With some, sugary flavoring in it and that
Sometimes
kind of stuff.
it's got a color or a carbonation to it.
Yeah, exactly. Put it in perspective for us. How much water does this company actually use?
Coca-Cola uses billions of gallons of water a year, and everything they do, of course, is based on water. And so what's interesting is that even a place like Coca-Cola, until about 15 years ago, didn't think of water as a key asset. If you read their financial documents where they're required to reveal what their risks and opportunities are, they never mentioned water as either a risk or an opportunity or even a core ingredient of their products. The first core ingredient they used to list was corn syrup.
Seems like an odd omission.
But a perfect symbol of, it's easy to poke fun at Coke, but that's the way all of us live, of course, throughout the day. Coke has their business wrapped around water, and their attitude changed after a scandal in India in which they were accused of taking water in rural villages in India that farmers and the villages themselves needed to grow food and to drink and wash and have hygiene every day. It turned out that they actually had been accused inaccurately. They were bottling soft drinks in those communities, but they weren't the reason that farmers and the communities didn't have water. But they learned a very interesting lesson from that scandal. And most people in India never closed the loop. They still think Coke stole these communities' water. And the lesson they learned is, if a community doesn't have adequate water for its routine use, they're not going to buy Coke products. And so the number one ingredient that Coke mentions in its financial documents that it's required to reveal now is water. And that sentence is followed by a whole list of the risks that Coke faces. Coke sells its products in 183 countries around the world. And in almost all those countries, Coke's water supply is under some pressure for some reason. And so what Coke has done is take a step back internally and say, we need to make sure that every community we operate in, whether it's a community that looks like Toronto, Canada, where there's abundant water, or it's a community like Jordan or Saudi Arabia, where water is a key asset every minute of the day, we need to make sure every one of those communities is paying attention to its community water supply and making it sustainable. So Coke has really kind of begun to create what I think of as almost an internal NGO, a water-focused department that looks not at water supply for this factory or that bottling plant, but at the water supply in the community. Because what they realized is, if a community doesn't have a good, reliable water supply, and this is their phrase, they won't have social permission to sell Coke. They won't have social permission to take yet more water and make money from it.
Okay.
And so they are very focused on reducing their own water footprint and also on helping communities make their water systems sustainable.
Okay. Coke and its use of water seems like a pretty obvious connection. Ford, the car company, and its use of water seems a more tenuous connection. I don't think we think about water going into the manufacturing of a car.
Right. When you buy a car, you better hope there's no water.
Exactly.
Except in the windshield washers.
But there's something going on there.
Well, it's interesting. Very, very quietly, starting in 2000, Ford embarked on a huge campaign to make its operations less water dependent.
How dependent on water can they be?
Very dependent. Thousands of gallons of water required to make every car, not including things like the steel, which requires thousands of gallons of water per ton of steel. Bill Ford, the scion of the company, who was then both the CEO and the chairman, concluded that water was a huge risk for the company. And so between 2000 and 2010, even as Ford was struggling to survive, frankly, they cut their water use per car by 50%. They cut the amount of water required to make each car around the world by 50%. And they were so impressed with their own performance and the impact that had. It reduces your water costs, it reduces your energy costs, it reduces your chemical costs, it reduces your wastewater costs. You pay as a factory for everything you send back out the door. That Ford doubled the goal. They are again in the middle of reducing water use per car manufactured by 50%, and they cut the time in half. From, instead of 10 years, they're doing it in 5 years. A car made by Ford in 2015 will use 1/3 the water that a car made in 2000 will use.
And the ramifications across all of society, or what?
Well, here's the immediate impact. There are 2 Ford factories in northern Mexico that are only operating today in the midst of a terrible drought because of the water treatment facilities that they have put in place. Those factories, those Ford factories, are in such a water scarce area that they recycle, they clean and reuse all their own water. And so they haven't completely severed their tie to the local community water system, but they've made themselves much more independent. Those cities where those factories operate are so water pressed now because of the drought that the Ford factories wouldn't be getting any water. Those factories wouldn't be operating if Bill Ford hadn't said 10 years earlier, we need to pay attention to this. So water is a huge risk that people never pay attention to. And if you are smart about your water as a company or a community, that gives you a huge competitive advantage over people who aren't thinking about it yet.
Well, here's another example. Again, IBM. One would not assume that there's a lot of water that goes into the manufacture or servicing of computers. Go ahead,
Again,
right.
Again,
Not the case.
you want to keep this and your laptop far away from each other,
Indeed
right?
you do.
But in fact, every computer chip that's ever been made requires a very special kind of water called ultra pure water. That's actually the name that the industry uses. It's water so clean it's not safe to drink. It's nothing but water. It would actually leach the minerals right back and nutrients right back out of your body. And so every microchip plant, every computer chip plant uses not only huge amounts of water, but they clean it to a degree we can't even imagine, and that's very expensive. And so this IBM plant, one of IBM's plants in Burlington, Vermont, decided to embark on a campaign similar to the Ford campaign. Let's see if we can reduce our water use to keep our chips inexpensive and competitive. We're part of the chip making process. And in the course of a decade, the water department at this computer chip plant doubled the water productivity of the plant. That is, the amount of chips that 100 gallons of water used to produce now only required 50 gallons of water. And so they dramatically reduced their costs. Here's how impressive a performance that was by that IBM plant. The folks at IBM headquarters in Armonk, New York, were watching. It was just a group of 35 people. They were so taken with the progress that group had made that they created a water division inside IBM. So there is now a water consulting division, the Smart Water, quote unquote, Smart Water group at IBM, and you can hire them to do what they did for themselves at your factory or your city or even across a whole watershed. So they now have a water consulting division. Now, one thing's really important, and I think it says something about water. IBM doesn't know anything about water, and they will be the first to tell you they don't know anything about water. IBM knows how to measure data and then see patterns in the data. So what they do when you hire them at your university or your factory is they measure how you're using water, what you do to it, and then they say to you, here's all the ways you're wasting water, why don't we work on some of these? So they don't claim to know anything about the actual stuff. What they can tell you is how you're using it and misusing it.
They're in the solutions business.
And the data business, exactly.
And the data business, right. Let me ask you about a different corporate example and get your view on this. You know, of course, in Western Canada, in the oil sands, they use an enormous amount of water to get that tar, oil, out of the sands and eventually to market. Right. And there are lots of people who obviously have a huge problem with the amount of water that's being used to make that happen. Are you one of those people?
Here's what I would say. I don't have a problem at all with the amount of water that they use. The question is what condition they leave the water in. We've learned a really important lesson over the course of the last 100 years of the Industrial Revolution and the Water Revolution. And that is the cost of water, the value of water is rarely factored into these industrial processes. I don't know for a fact, but I suspect that the water the tar sands natural resources companies use is free. The condition they leave it in, however, requires enormous cost to clean up. And so, to me, there's nothing wrong with going after the natural resource itself, but the companies that are going after it should be required, whether in Canada or in the United States or in China or India, wherever, to keep the water clean in the first place, to return the water to the condition it was in at the moment it was taken.
Can you do that?
Water can always be clean.
Even in that process?
Water can always, absolutely. The question is, do the economics of the natural resource make sense if you have to keep the water clean? There are lots of examples. The truth is, keeping it clean in advance is much less expensive than cleaning up the mess later. No one in Canada will be happy 100 years from now if the tar sands area looks like it looks now in terms of the geography and in terms of the water. It's much smarter to require people to keep the water clean in the first place than to hope that they will clean it up later on.
They hate it when you call it the tar sands. You know that, eh? They like to, it's now been rebranded the oil sands.
Oil sands.
Like
okay. Whatever phrase they want to use can't change what happens when you visit up there.
I
right?
merely tell you because if you're on a book tour in Western Canada and you
we
call
need
it the
to make
tar
sure
sands, they're sending you out the door right away. Just trying to
make sure
helpful.
we use the correct terminology.
Exactly.
You know, a single drop of petroleum in this glass of water renders the water unusable for most human purposes. Mm-hmm. The drop can be taken back out, but the effort to clean that one little drop of water out of this, or a much larger container of water, is much more expensive than not letting the drop of water in there in the first place.
Gotcha. I want to talk about Las Vegas, which you touched on at the end of our first conversation yesterday. And Las Vegas, I guess as everybody knows, is probably the driest city in the United States. It's got most days, I guess, in the summertime where it's over, you would say 100 degrees Fahrenheit, we'd say 35 or 38 Celsius. And it's got a population that has exponentially grown over the last decade. And of course, 35, 36 million visitors every year. It's got golf courses. It's got huge fountains in front of these casinos. It's got people who need to drink water. So tell the Las Vegas story. How do they manage all of this?
Well, that's actually why I went to Las Vegas. I'd had the experience of the fountains, the recreation of New York Harbor on the Strip, the Venetian Hotel, which recreates the canals of Venice, both outside the hotel and inside the hotel. You can gondola yourself around in the Venetian. And I thought, well, this seems crazy. And it turns out that the Las Vegas story is great at both ends. It is the driest city in the United States, number 280 of the 280 largest cities in terms of precipitation. It only gets 4 inches of rain a year. It also turns out to be a city where the water supply is strictly limited by law. The amount of water, Las Vegas gets all its water from Lake Mead. Lake Mead is a huge reservoir, the largest reservoir in North America, 110-mile-long lake, backed up by Hoover Dam. All of Las Vegas's water comes from that reservoir. And the amount of water that Las Vegas can take was set by U.S. federal law in 1935. They can't just open the spigot wider or build a bigger pipe. They're told how much water they can use. So how the city has doubled and doubled again just since 1990, 4 times the size it was in 1990. How are they growing at that pace without being able to take any new water? Well, they had a very smart water manager, a tough Western woman named Patricia Mulroy, and she looked at the population curve and the water curve, and she said, we're going to be in trouble. And 20 years ago, she started to put in place rules and practices that completely changed the water habits. So to start with the fountains and the New York Harbor and the canals on the Strip, all of the water used in those kinds of displays is reuse water. None of it is drinking water. It's all purified wastewater. So any display you see like that is using water that's already been used once. It's illegal to have a front lawn in Las Vegas now. Any home built since 2000 cannot have a front lawn. It must have desert landscape.
Because you'd have to water a front lawn, and you can't water a front lawn.
And one of the primary uses of water in Las Vegas going back 30 years is lawn watering, right? You're growing grass in the desert. It's like growing rice in the desert. But the most important, and Las Vegas has a whole set of rules. They tell you what kind of hose nozzle you can use to wash your car. They have a water police force to make sure your sprinklers aren't hitting the road or the sidewalk. And they will write you a ticket if you're letting water hit the road from your lawn watering.
They're serious about it.
They're very serious about it. But the most important thing Las Vegas has done is Las Vegas collects every drop of water that hits a drain anywhere in the community and cleans it and returns it to Lake Mead. They actually clean it almost to drinking water standards. The water they are returning to Lake Mead, they return it in the bed of an old natural stream called the Las Vegas Wash. That water is cleaner than the lake it's being returned to. So they clean and recycle 93% of the water used anywhere indoors in that city. There is no city anywhere in North America, anywhere in the United States or Canada, that even comes close to recycling 93% of its water. And by the way, they get a gallon of credit against their total water use for every gallon they return. So they're just cycling not literally the same water, but they're cycling the same water credits over and over.
But to come back to water consciousness, they are water conscious. They know they've got a finite natural resource there.
They know they've got a finite natural resource, and that has caused them to change their habits. By the way, the conservation effort is just as important. The city grew by 50% between 2000 and 2010, but the total amount of water used in 2010 was the same as in 2000. So as a city, they have actually cut their water use per person by almost a third.
I love the example you use in the book of the golf courses, because of course, I guess, 50 years ago, maybe more, Las Vegas and the surrounding areas, they took the desert and they put grass all over the desert. And then of course you need water to keep the grass alive.
Huge amounts. I mean, a typical golf course in Las Vegas will use 3 million gallons of water a day. Unreal. Just keeping the grass green.
But they're going the other direction now, eh? They're turning the grass into desert now.
It's the same thing. It's part of the rules that Patricia Mulroy put in place. Every golf course in Las Vegas has a water budget. And she is bringing the water budgets down 5% a year. Well, as everybody knows, you can get the first 5% and the second 5% of anything, your income, your calorie intake, your gas mileage, pretty easily. But then it gets harder and harder. And what the golf courses have discovered is that they can return golf courses to a kind of desert landscaping themselves. Not the tee, not the green, right, but lots of space in between. And so they're actually creating a new kind of golf course landscape. And many golf courses have literally cut their water use in half.
Now, you talked just a second ago about the idea of reusing wastewater. And that may be an oddly repulsive idea for people who don't know what's possible. Should it be an oddly repulsive idea?
Well, I hope that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, this is something we have left behind. My favorite way of talking about this is, anybody who eats in a restaurant at dinner uses a fork and a spoon that somebody else used at lunch or breakfast or dinner the night before.
Hopefully washed in the meantime.
So you're putting the fork in your mouth, and it was in someone else's mouth within 24 hours, right? But that doesn't freak us out. We know what cleaning dishes is like. We know we clean dishes ourselves, and we assume that a restaurant does an even better job than we do. Water can be cleaned the same way. And as we said yesterday, there's only one quantum of water on the planet. So whatever most unappealing place you can imagine, that water's been there. All it really takes to clean water is to put it out in the open and let it evaporate. Even the ponds of water at the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan from a year and a half ago, that radiation-tainted water, if it evaporates into the air, becomes pure again. So water can be cleaned. As dirty as the water is, we can always clean it. And for many cities, now this isn't always true in a place like Canada, but for many cities, and Las Vegas is a perfect example, the cheapest water you've got is the water you've already got. Mm-hmm. Cleaning it again so we can reuse it is much cheaper than going out into the environment and finding a whole new set of water for that city. So one of my favorite examples is Orlando. 25 years ago, they built wastewater treatment plants, not to clean their water to drinking water standards, just to irrigation standards. And now they require all new construction in Orlando to use that purified wastewater for all outdoor use. They have doubled the size of the city of Orlando in 25 years, and they take no more potable water than they ever did. And they've taught a whole generation of people that you don't need to water your lawn or your crops with purified drinking water.
Okay, but here comes the hard question now, in our last few minutes to go. We're not paying the value of water that we have in our homes, right? We're getting a big-time subsidy right now. We do not pay for the value of it. And I guess I'm wondering, you know, the TV show The Price is Right, I wonder whether today the price is wrong. Do we have to charge more for this?
The price is absolutely wrong. In fact, in every city in the developed world, the water bill you pay doesn't even cover the cost to get the water to you, the electricity and the staff of the water company. We don't even pay the operating costs. So water has always been subsidized, and I think the most valuable thing you could do to raise water consciousness and to get people to pay attention to their water is to raise the price.
We'd use less, wouldn't we?
We would immediately use less, like Ford does, like the city of Orlando does, like the city of Las Vegas does. I'm not saying that ordinary people should be priced out of water. No one should ever have to worry about whether they can flush the toilet or take a bath. That's not the problem. The problem is the next tier up. We should figure out what the basic needs are, give people that really inexpensively. But then people who want to have an acre of lawn in the middle of the summer should be paying the actual cost to get them that water.
In cities, though, you'd have to change some bylaws, because I know there's lots of apartment buildings in this city where you can't hang your wash out on the balcony. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if you want to cut down on your use of water and maybe wash by hand and dry by hand,
but you raise
a perfect
you raise a perfect point, and I don't know the details in Toronto, but almost a quarter of the single-family homes in Canada still don't even have water meters. Many apartment buildings don't have individual water meters for the apartments.
So we don't know what we're using.
And you don't pay for it. You turn the water on March 1st or July 1st and let it run all month, and the water bill would be the same. And so if you measure and charge people, they change their habits. And that's true in an apartment building in downtown Toronto. It's also true of farmers. I'm not talking about bankrupting anybody through their water bill. I'm talking about charging people enough to pay the cost of the water and waking them up to using water much more smartly.
Charles, in our last minute here, do you think there's something ironic about a guy writing a 400-page book on water who lives in a country where he can't drink the water? You live in Mexico. I
live in Mexico City, and something like 70% of the people in Mexico City have access to piped water that is not safe to drink. And to be honest, for me, it's a great experience. In fact, we can't brush our teeth with the tap water. We don't use it to cook with. We do shower in it. We obviously flush the toilet with it. Oddly, we wash our dishes with the water we can't drink. In the magic dish drainer, they somehow are sterilized. But what it means is that we as a family who, you know, we grew up in the U.S., have to think about water all the time. And for me, it's a really great lesson, a very small taste of what literally 1 billion people in the world have to cope with every day, which is thinking about where their water is going to come from and whether it's safe or not. And so it's also a lesson in, you know, Mexico City is a beautiful modern city, and yet they've let their water infrastructure deteriorate to the point where you cannot safely drink the water that they go to the trouble of supplying. And that, you know, you shouldn't let that happen. That's a bad thing for the economy of Mexico City.
A lesson to the rest of us as well. Really have enjoyed having you here for the last couple of days. Fascinating book, The Big Thirst, The Secret Life and Turbulent Future of Water. Charles Fishman has been our guest. Great to meet you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Not at all.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.